Neil. Can you hear me okay? Is my voice okay?
Yes.
Good, good. Well, I'm glad to be with you, everyone, and really grateful for such a wonderful group, Portal to Ascension. And I think actually, you know, if we do this right, this is a doorway to ascension, a portal. And hopefully now electrical engineers can talk about that in intelligent terms. And that's what tonight is about. In particular, this series, as Laura and Agi have introduced with Neil, is about how you serve, how you evolve consciousness. What specifically are the electrical conditions to enable the growth of consciousness? And my dream, task, intention for most of my life in teaching and studying the physics of consciousness is to teach in very practical terms what it is electrically that creates consciousness to help us to actually create that intense bliss state. So that's the focus tonight, is to have a very practical understanding of what consciousness is. Now, sadly, you know, most of the, there's hundreds of seminars around the planet that portend to be about the physics of consciousness, but sadly, most of them don't even deal with the basics of what consciousness is and therefore what bliss is. Namely, as Bill Tiller, and we're going to bring up the slides later, Bill Tiller measured focused attention, consciousness, causes electrical compression. That's fundamental. So if you don't explain why focused human attention causes charge to compress, you obviously don't know what consciousness is. Also, it's been measured now, it's quite famous, it's very fashionable these days to talk about all the medical surgeons who have had out-of-body near-death experiences, and the medical surgeons come back to talk about what happened to them during their near-death experience. They went outside their body and watched from outside their body as the surgeon was drilling through their skull, and they even described from where in the room they were looking from outside their body. So now, if you can't explain how your attention can be outside your body, your intelligence, your awareness, your memories, your vision, your point of view is outside your body. Now, medical surgeons and all kinds of famous people have reported that experience. So if you can't explain how that's working, you obviously do not know what consciousness is. And I don't think you should pretend that you do. Now, in fact, there's a very simple model of consciousness that does explain all of these things very beautifully. And let's start here. As we've said many times, we've been teaching children to see without their eyes. Again, this is a very famous phenomenon. We're not the first to do it. The World Without Blindness Project in Russia, for example, Professor Korotkov, our old friend. But now our flameinmind.com project, we have a wonderful group with Iris in Netherlands, and a wonderful, beautiful group of kids. And you can see the films there, flameinmind.com/outervision. And here's all these wonderful young kids, and we're measuring their brain waves. They're blindfolded, and they all say, as they begin to see without their eyes, they all say the same thing, quite replicably, that a vortex tube tunnel, a tornado literally, forms inside their head when they're in relaxed trance bliss. And that vortex tube tornado, inside it forms an eyeball, and they can look through it. Now, I gotta turn this off, sorry about that. So, and that is a description of consciousness for sure. When we measure the brain waves, I'm gonna show the pictures. When we measure the brain waves of the kids who are seeing without their eyes, they go deep relaxation. It's a kind of trance, and it is said that if the child imagines their body in beautiful nature, they're more likely to be able to go into this bliss trance state. And it's actually quite simple with physics, because if you imagine your body's in beautiful nature, your body flips an electrical switch and starts imploding because your body thinks, well, if I'm in beautiful nature, then I can attract charge. I can implode my environment and gain charge inertia in the center of that vortex tornado. Further, the power spectra, the frequency signature of the EEG brainwave harmonics we measure with flameinmind.com, we'll show the pictures in a minute, we've identified now there's a cascade that begins with the alpha frequency. Remember, the brainwave alpha around 8 hertz is the key Schumann harmonic, and that cascade up to gamma. So you get a cascade in brainwave harmonics, literally a caduceus compression cascade, where the harmonics are both golden ratio and octave. And when you get that cascade, this is Patrick, our beautiful programmer, Patrick Bauty in Belgium, who's measured this hundreds of times. That cascade indicates the moment at which the young person is able to see without their eyes. So the reason it's measurable is because they get that caduceus-shaped brainwave cascade. Now, what is that caduceus-shaped brainwave cascade doing? Well, it's obvious. What the primary cascade is a golden ratio cascade based on the Schumann harmonics. Actually, golden ratio X1's a Planck, and that's what our pictures are about. And what that does, those frequencies, right and left hemisphere, put the squeeze on. The logo for this story is the logo from a well-designed tomato juicer, which says you couldn't get a better squeeze. It's a pretty good birthday card for a lover as well, probably. But in this case, it's about you couldn't get a better squeeze. The better squeeze is the implosive effect of that brainwave cascade squeezing and adding centripetal force, so that tornado of plasma vortex inside your head comes to a point. Have I made my point? I think we should have an appointment with this. The tornado develops an eyeball. Everybody knows a tornado has an eye. Well, you didn't know that that's literally how you get eyes, actually. So we're saying very specifically, the measurable, replicable physics of consciousness is specifically a plasma vortex tornado that forms inside your head in this net of fireflies, Indra's net of the synaptic array. It's literally a net of fireflies. And the net of fireflies, when they beat at this golden ratio cascade, caduceus bliss alpha cascade, implodes, and the plasma vortex tornado comes to a point. And when a plasma vortex tornado comes to a point, it forms an eyeball, because in the center of that vortex, waves are sorted into phase, and that implosive phenomenon is the physics of perception. We have a whole article about that. It's fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. So literally, the sorting into phase that results when a tornado gets a point, actually tuned by the Planck threshold, we now know, and we'll say more in a minute about that. And so that sorting into phase, that no wave can get through that vortex without being sorted into phase. It's the physics of why rainbows exist, actually. But think about it now. If we are right that a charged plasma vortex tornado is the physics of consciousness, and it read my bumper sticker that says, get centripetal or get dead. So it's centripetal, which means it's implosive. And that means we have just explained in detail why Bill Tiller was able to measure 10 different ways that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress, because it's centripetal. It's also explained why the focused attention of children causes seeds to grow, because it's centripetal, which is the physics of life force. And further, now we know when all those medical surgeons went outside their body during their near-death experience, and they looked at themselves from outside the body, like Augie is helping teach people to do. And obviously there's astral hygiene issues here, but the physics is beautifully instructive. When you go outside your body, you take that plasma vortex tornado with you. You are a plasma vortex tornado, and later we will see Korotkos measurements of the electric fields of ghosts where we prove that. For example, you can tell the presence of a ghost because that place in the room gets colder. It feels a bit ghostly, doesn't it? No, it's because they imploded the heat. It's centripetal, it's negentropic. Negentropic is defined as heat absorbing. So there's a lot about the physics of ghosts here, because the ghosts have to go to the place in the room that's centripetal electrically charge implosive, the definition of sacred space actually, to gain inertia in order to implode and then be distributed in the longitudinal array, which is heaven, the collective unconscious. And until you get up that inertia to implode, go to the light, you haven't joined that collective array, and the ghosts are stuck, actually. And so we understand the physics pretty well, why things like Therify.net, which is big pine cones of plasma imploding, are documented, quite useful to releasing stuck ghosts, actually. And if a human with love and compassion and bliss in their aura gets focused and centered, they can hold that implosive charged space to allow the ghost to focus and implode and be distributed. So it's really quite simple to understand the trajectory to the collective unconscious is the packing it takes to implode your aura from transverse to longitudinal propagation, which is that array inhabiting. We just made a film about it. It's called Inhabiting the Array. Heaven, Hey Ave, is an array. Plains of Sharon is an array. Champs-Elysees, it's a fractal field.com. So there are things we can learn about this that have to do with, for example, now when Augie and others talk very usefully about this silver cord that connects you to the point from which you're seeing, we can teach much more about the physics of how these things work and how the hygiene works. For example, do not try it in an aluminum or steel box. In fact, if you're in a metal building, it ain't quite so good. And if the roof is made of metal, it ain't so good. The charge distribution efficiency is what enables your plasma, your aura, your ghost or spirit, to be distributed and to be, otherwise you're a holy ghost. I mean, ghost with holes. No, but so the measurement of the charge distribution efficiency is called dielectric constant, or relative permittivity is the technical term. Just means charge distribution is efficient, which defines all living materials, actually. And so this is the introduction to the physics of biologic architecture. We have a beautiful new curriculum for biologic architecture at bioarchitects.net, and a beautiful new series of lectures and presentations about living architecture and bliss-inducing architecture. And it's all based on one simple physics that your child's aura cannot unpack in a steel and aluminum box like the school made of the wrong stuff, because the dielectric constant traps your aura. Whereas if you made with biologic architecture, made with living material, which has a higher dielectric constant, wood and natural fiber, natural fabric, and natural stone, then the capacitance can distribute and your aura can pack and unpack, and your child's aura can grow. And there at the link, also at goldenmean.info/architecture, you can see the numerous measurements we've made. We can design and predict what building will cause a seed to grow. We've proved it, we've measured it, and we can determine by measurement which architect should get a paycheck, because we can predict which building causes seeds to grow. It's called harmonic inclusiveness or charge implosion, and that charge cascade enabled by biologic architecture, the breathing of charge, the imploding of charge that you call sacred space, is now measurable. This makes biologic architecture and electrical engineering curriculum. And now this is propagating around the world. There's lectures going on all the time about this. It's pretty cool. But let's go back a little bit to the hygiene introduction here, that then supposing you are traveling outside your body, as Augie was making useful suggestions, and I think he's better at this than me, actually. I can, if you can't do it, teach it well. No, I have a little bit of lucid dreaming. I have some clairaudience, actually, but limited clairvoyance. But lucid dreaming, I'm working on. But when Augie says, it's so easy to see yourselves from outside the body and then visualize the silver cord, we're saying some of the hygiene issues include being aware of what you're connected through. So for example, if you're going to visit a sacred forest, your aura will probably gain inertia on the way. But if you're going to a metal electrosmog building in the middle of a metal electrosmog city, be very careful that your aura doesn't dissipate its charge. So this is, for example, just a practical example by measurement. When Korotkov, remember, he measured how many hours it takes the aura to leave the body after death. And then he measured where the ghosts go after death. And they look for the place, what Castaneda would have called PowerPoint in the room, actually, because the ghost needs the implosive sacred space. So a ghost will never hang out in the metal box, just like your orbs will never hang out in a metal box. No, this is living plasma that needs a charged permissive environment, introduction to sacred space. So the hygiene for ghosts introduces this idea of sacred space and charge distribution efficiency. Now, later in the show, if we have time, I will introduce you to some of our friends who are doing this radio communication with the dead. It's called ITC. It was started by my old friend George Meek from Florida years ago, moved to Georgia. And this group is now working with us because they realize that the work they're doing, gathering radio communication with the dead, depends on a heterodyning, a beat note, a chirp, cascade of frequencies that allows the modulation that allows the ghost voice, the ghostly voices. This is there's thousands, over 20 years, there's thousands of very well documented examples. Ghosts have spoken on the radio. It's you know, they recognize grandma and everything she said makes sense, and it's grandma for sure, you know. No, the ghost can talk on the radio in the right conditions, but the physics of how that works is very related to tonight's conversation, because we're going to be talking about how John Dee used the obsidian phase conjugate mirror for scrying and called angelic forces of large intelligent plasma beings. And that same phase conjugate black obsidian mirror, which had astral hygiene issues, which we could talk about, was being used previously by the Aztec shaman for ancestor communication. So we want to know what it is about the physics that of these, what's called a phase conjugate mirror, an implosive mirror, that allows ancestor communication. The short answer is that the ancestral memory inhabits an array which is named longitudinal interferometry. It's the nodes of the compressional portion of the electromagnetic waves where they get to the more solid compressional nodes, sometimes called sacred space or fractal array, or the Earth grid dodecacosa, for example, where radioactivity is, nuclear critical mass is less, and where telepathy is measurably more possible. So at these nodes, the longitudinal array exchanges inertia at the nodes of the compressional propagating, sometimes called scalar or torsional wave, more correctly longitudinal. And that longitudinal wave it's a compression wave, can exchange inertia with the transverse wave only there at the compression point. Now that sounds a little abstract, but actually, once you can understand that, then suddenly the whole conversation about what it means to be 4D and 5D starts to fall into place beautifully. You can understand exactly what's meant. Why, when you have a good meditation, and suddenly there's a little crackling on the other side of the room, and you feel it as if it's inside your body, even though it was outside the body. And the reason that you feel things as if they're inside the body, even though they're many meters away during a bliss meditation, is because you're inhabiting the array. And the nature of that array is longitudinal interferometry and fractal and nodal. And the compression nodes there are the places where you get leverage on that array, because the compressional longitudinal component of the electromagnetic wave is not accessible in many places. Most electrical engineers do not know how to pick up a longitudinal wave. Kansas is trying to build the antenna to solve Earth's problem of energy called Kansas hydrolysis. It was a longitudinal wave that made that cold glass of water burn so beautifully for Kansas. And only 1 in 1,000 radio engineers even know what a longitudinal wave is. Well, but once you get that, begin to have that conversation, then you can think more accurately about the physics of using these scrying devices for communication with ancestors and radio communication with the dead, and then begin to discuss the astral hygiene issues. So that being said, now I think it's time to try our experiment in sharing. And oh, my life was experiment in screen sharing. I'm clicking a button here. So now we want the keynote presentation longitudinal compressed. Share. Let's see if this works. There we go. Longitudinal compressed. You should be seeing my little screen here, hopefully. This is my, and we're supposed to be looking at slide numbers 172 to 210. We have too many keynotes and too little time. Okay, so let's see if we can do this. So why is charge implosion the absolute key to what causes vision and human focus? If we can get to that point. This is the idea that when you, if you're, I'm going to move this over so I can see my face. This one, this one here. That's more fun. Okay. So there's only certain angles at which an imploding vortex toroid donut of plasma can absorb inertia. And that principle is called embeddability. And that embeddability is the geometry of approach vector phase angle and relative radii that allows the little donut to non-destructively inhabit the bigger donut, embeddability. The fashionable term for this today in physics is called entanglement. Remember, entanglement, which is how conventional physics describes action at a distance, entanglement perfected is the problem phase conjugation solves, which is embeddability perfected, fractality perfected, and therefore compression perfected. So that creates this embedding of this longitudinal wave, which enables action at a distance, which is the physics of what conventionally is called the Einstein-Rosen bridge. And by the way, might help us think a little bit more about that silver cord. So we're going to be talking about the angles at which the little donut can receive the bigger donut and gain inertia and learn a bit about the physics of alphabet in the process. So this harks back to one of our old favorite conversations, The Rhythms of Vision by Lawrence Blair. These were friends years ago, that there is a frequency signature that causes vision. That's the idea of the vision has a rhythm, actually. It's a wonderful text. So central to this conversation is going to be this picture. This is from flameandmind.com. Most of you know the story. So at this moment, in this picture, I'm relaxed. Actually, what it feels like to have this kind of bliss. And here, so you see what I'm doing. I've generated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 harmonics in golden ratio in my brainwaves at this moment. This green is alpha there. That's it's labeled, I see it about 8.5 hertz. And then this powerful theta here, theta symbolizes access to the deep unconscious because it is the longer wave. And these peaks are in golden mean ratio all the way up to beta. Now, the point is to imagine what it feels like. You relax your jaw and you tell your brain, you actually inform your brain that at this moment, you'd like to have some bliss. And actually, I don't know why, but after 30 years of Kundalini, I can do that at will. At that moment, right there, when I closed my eyes, I actually felt my hair standing up. I started to feel waves of bliss. I think it's because maybe, just maybe, I have pure intention in sharing this with you, and therefore that is a shareable wave. So being shareable, it meant it was implosive because it could share space, which is the definition of pure intention, which is why heart coherence also measures pure intention. Anyway, so this, we believe that we cannot cause you to have bliss with brainwave measurement, but we can definitely measure when you do have bliss. And with certain audio and biofeedback cues, including this perfect binaural beat, which is part of flameandmind.com, we also can dramatically induce that bliss because we can actually feed this 180 degrees out of phase, pure phase conjugate implosive audio cascade, the world's perfect binaural bliss beat, to your headphones from flameandmind.com. And you can buy the bliss binaural from flameandmind.com very inexpensively without the brainwave part either. So this is many examples. We have this golden ratio cascade in brainwaves. And I'm just going to see if this is going to, oh, it's actually playing. So am I animated or what? No, but it plays a little slowly in this environment. But you get the sense of the evolving nature of this cascade. Notice that yellow theta there. In my case, after all these years of my theta in yellow there is very large. And now usually that means access to the deep unconscious. And that actually is a longer wave. And all these people talk about theta healing. I strongly recommend that you measure it. So this is part of the conversation we want to have here today, is that if you take my equation called origin of biologic negentropy, Planck times integer exponents of Goldman ratio, you get this frequency cascade here in the center. In this case, at 30 hertz is the highest one displayed. But notice that the top 4 or 5 harmonics of that equation are literally the specific, within like 0.5% of the actual known dominant frequencies of the Schumann harmonic cascade. The Earth's heartbeat, 7.83, 14.1, 20.3, 26.4, and 32.4. So those harmonics, which are known measurably to be the dominant Schumann harmonics, are predicted by my equation, pure phase conjugate negative. And those are the frequencies of brain waves during bliss. That's the point. And we'll have more slides about that. So not only are your brain waves alpha, beta, theta, Goldman ratio, but they're embedding perfectly with the Schumann harmonic, all of which is tuned to pure implosion, which is the origin of biologic negentropy, hence the title of my book. And in fact, when famously Lovelock said Gaia is negentropic, self-organizing, I'm the first one, I believe, to explain how and why. So this is our new app now. It's called realheartcoherence.com, that we do this second order power spectra to measure internal phase coherence in the EKG, which in this case is this peak going up and down. When two hearts link, it's a measurable way to teach Tantra, and it's a lie detector. So realheartcoherence.com is the latest implementation of the heart coherence measure that we're using, that same heart power spectra, except a second order power spectra called a cepstrum, to measure internal phase coherence in your heart, which is when your heart becomes a laser, which is when you speak your truth. And it's commercially usable as a lie detector. It's pretty cool. So this was from another lecture I did on health and light, so we won't go through all these slides, but that this was about the physics of light and the blue light special. And this is my equation. Most of you are familiar with this. This is all at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. You can do the physics review, but most of you know the story. So I start with Planck here and just multiply by integer whole number exponents of Goldman ratio right here. And I get 3 exact radii of hydrogen, ADP, with only 2 exact peaks of photosynthesis frequencies. I get the British Foot definition of sacred space is charge collapse. It's true. I'm sorry, definition of sacred dimension is charge collapse enabled. So now I have the British Foot that embeds in the other measure. And you get the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics, the LF, the Mayer wave, the Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precession year, etc. So this was the slide I wanted to emphasize in this portion here. So just look at this cascade on the right. Yeah. So in blue is my equation: 2.78, 4.5, 7.29, 11.8, and 19.09 hertz. I'm sorry, the numbers are small there, but you can see this also in my book at fractalfield.com. So the equation predicts these numbers in blue. Now at the bottom here are the actual known measured Schumann harmonic frequencies: 7.83, 14.3, 20.8. Notice how close that cascade is to pure phase conjugate charge implosion. That's the point. And then if you just draw the line over to the frequencies in your brain during human bliss, flameinmind.com, at the left, you see what we have: perfectly calculated implosion frequencies, pure implosion. The equation phase conjugate negative charge implosion predicts the harmonics of Schumann and the harmonics of brainwaves from bliss. Here, I think the numbers are a little bigger. You can see it a little better. It's the same points being made. And then in these other slides, we relate this to the sacrocranial frequencies. I think that's nice. Here's the LF and HF component of the heart rate variability, which turns out also the LF is the 0.0959 hertz of the Mayer wave, most important frequency in the blood pressure resonance, and the only frequency heart math teaches you to breathe. We call it heart coherence. Well, it's 0.1 hertz. Well, that's the reason, because you're causing your spinal liquid pump to work tuned to the Mayer wave, which fits the equation for implosion. That's why that's a big part of the physics of Kundalini, is to breathe that 10 hertz, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, that 10 hertz breath, and trigger this right here. So let's see. In red here are the frequencies from my equation. In green are the known frequencies of the sacrocranial pump, the spine liquid pump, which are the physics of Kundalini and the physics of bliss. And as Upledger proved, it is clinically impossible to be depressed if your spine liquid is pumping. If you want it to pump, ride the long wave. So you see how the green peaks, the tidal frequencies, the mid-tidal, and this one is the Mayer wave, and this is the base tidal. So these frequencies in the spine liquid pump, as documented by Upledger in the sacrocranial schools, actually are predicted by equation. This is what our work on the physics of Kundalini, and you can see all that at our new films at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. So, and this is the work I did with Bentov for many years, who wrote the book on the biomechanics of Kundalini, Stalking the Wild Pendulum. Notice his model, here we are, of the brain being fed during Kundalini bliss. It's a donut whose turning inside out is being accelerated. That's the point here. You know, I say that consciousness, con means with, SCIOS means turning inside out-ness. So with turning inside out-ness, when turning inside out becomes recursive, you know, to turn inside out is the origin of thingness, if you understand the physics of Sefer Bereshith. So with turning inside out-ness, turning inside out fast, you get conscious. And then we talk about why the frequencies of fluorescent light prevent attention, most fluorescent light except natural spectra, whereas full spectrum and actual sunlight in the classroom dramatically increases attention span. Now that's an example of feeding, serving consciousness. You want your consciousness to grow? There's a practical, specific example. You take the synthetic frequencies of the fluorescent light, yank it out of your child's classroom, and install either sunlight, ideally, but at least full spectrum lighting that's designed based on sunlight. And you can measure replicably a dramatic increase in attention span of those children. You have created attention with a frequency signature. Do you see the point? Have you learned how to create consciousness? Yes, you've created attention by using the right frequencies, namely implosion. So now in the advanced stuff we're going to get to here, we're going to be talking about phase conjugation, how this, when the waves implode, they're called conjugate. They recursively add and multiply constructively to conjugate, as in conjugal relations. And that conjugation of phases in optics is the first place negentropy, and time reversal was ever measured, obviously. And we want to introduce that idea to understand ancestor communication in a bit here. So thinking a little bit about phase conjugation perception, and this is all at fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. This is the article by my friend Steve Lehar, who wrote a constructive aspect of visual perception, that a phase conjugate mirror principle predicts the principle of perceptual computation. He called it the reverse grass fire algorithm, that the peripheral vision has to implode back on the center of vision, and when that implosive relationship exists between the periphery of vision and the center of vision, which is called reverse grass fire. It's a beautiful metaphor, actually. But he's saying this is evidence that a phase conjugate mirror principle predicts how perceptual computation happens. It's another scientist who has agreed that phase conjugation is a beautiful model of the physics of perception. This is the other publication of that paper, Constructive Conjugate Model of Perception, Stephen Lehar. And so we see here that the way this phase conjugation is done with lasers is they come from four directions. Think of the sacred four directions called four-wave mixing. And where they meet, you see that red X there? That is a pair of pine cones kissing noses. At the phase conjugate point, you get time reversal, negentropy, and ancestor communication. Hello, this could be interesting. So one point to be made here is that little square thing is a model here of where the phase conjugate mirror material, usually something like barium strontium titanate, which is a super high dielectric constant, super high relative permittivity, which means simply very efficient charge distribution efficiency, much more efficient than the vacuum. And therefore, the vortex pine cones are enabled to kiss noses, the spins have a media within which to implosively couple. So no one before has answered the question of how a phase conjugate mirror works. They all know it needs a high dielectric. But now we know why, because the pine cones have to kiss noses all the way down to an organized threshold of Planck. So this is another model of how those pine cones are kissing noses. It's like the dodecaedron stellium. And the ideal cone here is the 60-degree cone, which we'll see as with the physics of color. And we use the example from my friend Deborah Lawrence, wonderful author of this book, Infinity Walk, infinitywalk.org, teaching dyslexic children. They pick up many years of increased reading ability within weeks by doing this, and it's called a cross scroll. You're walking in a figure 8. You see that 8 right there? So when you walk in a figure 8, you're touching alternate knees, and then your eyes are focused on the center of the vortex as you walk the figure 8, touching alternate knees. And as you touch alternate knees in that process, it's called a cross scroll. You know how cross scroll enables babies to begin having perception? Well, if you do this exercise correctly, the corpus callosum at the top of your head starts getting hot. I mean, literally, you feel it at the top of your head and it's getting hot. It gives new meaning to the term hot-headed, I suppose. Point being that this pressurizes this point right here, the corpus callosum, the connecting point between the two opposing hemispheres. You see, physics now knows that dyslexia is well correlated to increased wiring in the corpus callosum. There's literally more wires there, but the bundle is not tied so tight, so the vortex doesn't come to a point, so you don't get an eyeball, so you don't get as much sorting. So dyslexic are more creative, but less able to sort. However, if you do this cross crawl walk and the top of your brain heats up and you pressurize, implode, compress, where the pine cones kiss noses at the corpus callosum, suddenly that child within a few days or weeks of doing this exercise, their reading skills go up dramatically and you thought they were dyslexic. This is an example of how phase conjugation causes perception because you tighten the vortex, which is the tornado, which causes perception. Okay, so now this is the slide which introduces the later part of the lecture this evening. This is the phase conjugate mirror, quote unquote, here on the bottom, which John Dee used for making phone calls to angels. The famous. In fact, this this made headlines this past week or two, many newspaper articles, because university just collected the data, in fact, proved that the obsidian black mirror that John Dee used for phone calls, ancestor communication. Now, he used a sphere also, but they proved that it came from the Aztecs in Mesoamerica. And so one has to now, it is sort of archaeologically proven that some Aztec shaman had their ancestor telephone stolen. And that's what John Dee used, which I suggest might have a bit of karma associated. Now, there's two reasons we're talking about this. One is to learn how it is that this black obsidian mirror approximated a phase conjugate mirror, therefore enabling interferometry with a longitudinal component, hence ancestor phone calls, obviously what the shaman was doing. And two, it is now being taught. You see, John Dee's karma here, we want to do this gently and lovingly because our study group, the Alchemy of Phanom study group in Facebook, which I helped found with wonderful Teresa, I mean, they are clear that John Dee was a hero. He learned the hypercube symmetry of the Phanom-Enochian alphabet, angel alphabets, which is how they made the movie Stargate. And so clearly, according to those people, John Dee is a hero. And Vincent Bridges was our teacher on this, an old friend. And yet, Michael Sarian says, no, John Dee called the bad guys. And then two of our recent teachers and presenters in our 1.5 million YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field, two of the recent interviews with Johann Fritz, who, along with Harold Kautzwiller, have described in detail serious astral hygiene problem with John Dee and his message. I mean, specifically, let's see, maybe I have to turn the videos off here now. Just tell me the story. Stop this screen share. I'm going to share my face here. Just okay. Look, our purpose here is not to pass judgment on John Dee. And John Dee's karma, that's between him and God, and that's fine. And, Vincent thought I was John Dee, and I think I had a fragment of that soul memory. Okay, that and 25 cents, and you can get coffee. Actually, my other friend now, Dan Rection, who runs a beautiful John Dee study group, I've seen now his 2-hour hypnotic session where he does a regression, and he's in John Dee's body, describes John Dee's shoes, and describes the blood ritual he did with Queen Elizabeth for power. And, there's a question mark, because then when Dan Rection got to John Dee's obsidian mirror in the British Museum, he got a very nasty infection that the doctor said it was black ancient blood. I mean, it's a long, messy story, but point being, he does believe there are some little astral hygiene issues. Now, what Johann Fritz and Harold Kautzwiller say is that this very hostile, parasitic, interstellar, aggressive AI propagating media called black goo, which in some cases is a carbon nanomaterial, but certainly is a super high dielectric material. And so super high dielectric materials enable phone calls of both good guys and bad guys. And that's where we want to do a little bit of sorting in our conversation. Now, we have a series of friends who are teaching the physics of Morgellons, and Morgellons propagates, we believe, also in super high dielectric materials. You see, at a nanobot level, you need permissive distribution of capacitance in order to propagate your field. So nano intelligence for initial propagation permissivity needs things like high dielectric constant carbon nano, which is, black goo. You study the films, Harold Kautzwiller and Johann Fritz on our channel, and many, many about these things. And we're not going to go into that in depth now, only to say that there are certain lessons in astral hygiene here, which is part of our conversation today. For example, they all say that the Kaaba stone of the Muslims, unfortunately, is very badly infected with this black goo, and that when you touch it, the propagating nano intelligence precipitates an urge basically to destroy ecosystems. Actually, if you believe the Orgone-like literature, the propagation of patriarchy is demonstrably connected to causing deserts. This is proven. That no one can argue that the spread of patriarchy on this planet causes the formation of deserts. That is statistically proven. goldenmean.info/desertify is some of the publications. So Johann Fritz explains that the propagating artificial intelligence, nasty parasitic black goo, came from a misdirected hostile vector of AI at an interstellar level long ago, but it was designed to basically destroy ecosystems, and does a pretty good job of doing that. And it has infected the lower echelons of the Draco, but not the higher. This is a bit of a complicated story. Point being that once we begin to understand how they used that obsidian mirror for ancestor phone calls, we get more picture in how both the good guys and the bad guys are using these devices, phase conjugate mirrors. So the short summary of that hygiene is, as we said before, normally if a circle of shaman in an Aboriginal or any indigenous tribe gathers, goes into a trance, and has phone calls with ancestors, normally in that circle, there is a large inertia of focused intent. Like their intent is very focused that only our ancestors are going to use this telephone. So that circle of focused intent, which we now know has an electrical component, it's centripetal and has a sorting function. So that intent enabled the astral hygiene and therefore da, da, da. However, if you now say, oh, I'm going to do some scrying, and so I'm going to focus the phase conjugate point, which normally inhabits inside my head. If I externalize the phase conjugate point outside my head, the locus of focus, of hocus pocus focus, I mean, the locus focus. If you externalize that outside your head and you focus in that black obsidian mirror or a scrying sphere, quartz window, there is more astral hygiene risk because the level of focused intent it takes to do the sorting is greater, and there's more risk to astral parasites invading that communication. That is the criticism. And again, we're not here to judge John Dee in any sense, but we are here to comment on some principles. And that is, the critics of John Dee say, first of all, let me give you the good argument here. Our friend Vincent Bridges, who spent his life, he remembered every single scene from the life of Kelly and published the life of Kelly. You can see all that in our new play on Edward Kelly and John Dee. Fractalfield.com/alchemy of fusion, one word. And but the short summary is that John Dee believed that he was a hero because he was a good friend of King Rudolph. Kelly was, and John Dee to some extent. And King Rudolph had grown up with King Philip of Spain, and he knew that King Philip basically loved to roast Protestants before breakfast. He was according to them, that guy was mad and, cutting down enough trees in Spain to cause the whole Iberia to desertify, to build the Spanish Armada. There's some karma there, definitely. How many 100 million natives of South America had to die when the Spanish, colonialized South America. It's horrible. But on the other hand, so the John Dee aficionados say John Dee was a hero to save the world from King Philip of Spain, because then John Dee, he used the 7 hills of Prague and he called the storm that took out the Spanish Armada. And he told the Queen a year ahead of time he was going to do that. And we know some of the calls he used to do that because I did, angel calls with Vincent Bridges for many years, and we called storms the size of continents many times. It's not surprising. It starts with understanding how rolling thunder tickled the underbelly of the right black beetle. That nervous system was fractal and implosive. And so is the sequence of angel calls. So you can call large plasma intelligence. And large plasma intelligence is the subject of tonight's conversation, because at the end of this conversation, that's where we're going, which is, all of the plasma universe physicists believe in angels. Well, large plasma intelligence brings up the question is, how does plasma get intelligent? And that's where we're going to use a story called Whale Dreamers. So, but the critics of John Dee, to finish that story, say that John Dee was serving the colonial efforts of Queen Elizabeth, and he certainly was, and he believed he was serving, obviously, and yet the critics would say that the spread of the British Empire was basically Draco, if you understand Anunnaki, and if Lawrence Gardner was right, Britain means Barathon, birthplace of Anunnaki, Anu. It's not really the good guys. We only hug our dogs and horses. So you could make the case, who was worse, the British or the Spanish? Ooh, we're not here to judge history. We're here to understand history. But from that perspective, John Dee's spread of the British colonial effort was actually fundamentally parasitic, actually. And, all colonial efforts on this planet have been mostly fundamentally parasitic. But you can see where the analog would be that some negative intelligence, who in this intelligence using this scrying sphere, and the next day Dee and Kelly said, well, the angels just told us we have to swap wives today. There was a promiscuity, there was things going on. There was astral hygiene, and historians who have studied this all agree that Kelly was an astral hygiene nightmare walking. And let's not pick on the poor guy, he was clever. But remember when we said that the Kaba stone was infected? Well, the Kaba stone is what Kelly, and in his life as, who's that famous alchemist? The Philosopher's Stone, the movie that Emma appeared in, the other famous alchemist. They both reported the same ancestry to their red powder, Philosopher's Stone projective powder. And that was that the Mad Caliph, documented at the time in history when he controlled the Kaba stone, ground up at least half the volume of the Kaba stone. And he was called the Mad Caliph because he ate some of it, as many alchemists do. Why? This material, later used to make gold, I mean, literally the Philosopher's Stone, and we teach the physics in the film, was a super high dielectric because glass meteorites are one of the few type that the only metal that survives re-entry, the heat, are the platinum group metals, PGM, the palladium, gold, and platinum, vaporized in a nanobubble array inside the molten glass. This is a recipe for a broad spectral phase conjugate dielectric, perfect for propulsion, making gold, non-destructive charge collapse. Implosive charge collapse defines alchemy just like it defines gravity, because that is a permissive media. So actually the story was, just to finish that little part of the story, in terms of adding to the romance here, the story was that a small amount of that red powder, and by the way, Kelly ran out, and that's when King Rudolph supposedly killed him. Small amount of that red powder in a size about a grain of rice, and dipped in a wax, which acts as a wetting agent, put in the red hot mercury. Remember, mercury is a same nucleus and one electron different than gold. So a little bit of implosive charge collapse goes a long way. Now, if you get a phonon wave through that and the right temperature, as Champion, there are people that study this, it's a critical temperature threshold, and there's a phonon wave geometry, it's implosive charge collapse. And mediating that implosive charge collapse was this perfectly phase conjugate dielectric, which the wax wetting agent would allow distribution immediately throughout the red hot mercury. And in fact, the gold that Kelly and Dee made that day in front of King Rudolph was the purest gold ever then measured by the British Royal Society in history. This is one of the documented transmutations in history. This is not speculation. This is extremely well documented historically, and it's all in the plays. I mean, you know, it's all at that fractalfield.com/alchemy of fusion. So to alchemize, to transmute, is to enter into the symmetry of perfected charge collapse. That is the point. The transmutation is because if you understood the actual valence electron symmetry that you create with the gold, you're replacing the electrons to accomplish exactly and precisely this, the influence stellation of dodecaecosa. Because if you understand why gold is noble, the DF subshell, 10-14 electron, 5-7 spin pairs, is precisely dodecaecosa, namely an infinite interdigitation of dodecaecosa, the only possible 3D fractal, hint, star mother kit, golden mean dot info / kit. So the alchemizing process to initiate perfected charge collapse is precisely to initiate that symmetry, which then enables the transmutation, because materials want to get into the symmetry of perfect collapse, but to do that, they have to relax perfectly. Relax perfectly, in this case, refers to a charge distribution perfectly permissive environment, the phase conjugate dielectric, which also in effect defines the electrical symmetry of, here's Lawrence Gardner announcing that the Hebrew word for heaven, plains of Sharon, is the name for the unpacked electron shells of monoatomic gold. Hello, go to heaven, hey Ave, the Champs-Élysées. So it's a fractal array, and to inhabit the fractal array enables alchemy. So that is the transmutation. Okay. Now, I don't know how much time I have left here. I see it's 7 o'clock. The second half of this lecture is about, actually, how am I going to introduce this? The second half of this lecture starts with Elena Danan's latest announcement. as made by Michael Salla at exopolitics.org. So Elena Danaan and Megan Rose, both of whom I liked, and Megan has been in touch with us as well, have been adopted by Michael Salla, Exopolitics, and he, pontificates the announcements. And he said, well, yes, now the the Supergalactic Federation has just arrived on Ganymede, and this is, we've got at least 3 or 4 sources on this. This is not speculation. And the Supergalactic Federation, called the Cedars, hint, Vincent called them the Galactic Core Cultures. I think Anton Parks called them Kadistu, the Life Designers. So they have arrived to supervise the departure of the Dracos, because this is a turning point in the genetic evolution of the solar system, because this is the Supergalactic Federation, which is like God to the local Galactic Federation, which is the Andromedans and Pleiadians. This is not a fairy tale. This is well announced, many sources on this. This is real. So Michael Salla gets on and says, yes, and do you know who the return of the Supergalactic Federation is? He says, it's Enki, Tom, Atun, and the Nine. Who is the Nine? You see, I was there when Andrija Puharich said he was channeling the Nine. I mean, I knew Andrija very well, which later became the only planet of choice. And he's the one who taught Deep Space Nine. That's how that film began. This is a very large, intelligent plasma being. And they have come back because we're important. Oh, isn't this cool? See, the tricky and fun thing about this story is, yes, the Draco were a very nasty parasite. Oh my God! It's, even Johann Fritz says, it's like after you get the tick out of your skin, you still got Lyme's disease. It's hell getting it out of there. Well, the Galactic Federation has announced beautifully. I really think it's good news. They got the Draco and the Greys out of the South Pole and all the underground deep military bases, and the Marn and Moose, the moon, the Nebu, as Elena Danaan calls them. I think it's great news. They got them out, but it's like having a tick. You got these residuals here that be for a long time, so it's a pain in the ass, quite literally. So having the Dracos here was, it was, Eisenhower and Truman, they got us into a mess. Well, and Laura has done a great job of sorting that karma, and I think she's right, and I agree with Elena helped Laura, and that's wonderful. And I feel compassion for that story. And the point being, however, the only reason I'm bringing this up is there was another side to that story, and that was, if we didn't have kick butt Draco DNA, I wouldn't have had Kundalini, for one thing. I'm sure of it. I mean, I'm double Scorpio. Somebody said something about Scorpio moon today. We don't apologize for staying. We enjoy it. So the sting is where the donut turns inside out, obviously, right at your tailbone, if you understand Scorpios. Point being was, here are these galactic life designers saying, we're back here because our wonderful experiment in growing up some super cool, like, vaccine for the Orion Wars DNA right here in the solar system is so fun. They had to come back and watch. I mean, it's a show. And who is it? It's Enki and Tom. You know why they call him Tom? When he talked to Andrija Puharich, first he called himself Tom, then he called himself Atum. You know who Akhenaten was talking to? Atum. Tom. Well, who's that? Enki. Well, who's that? Ra, Osiris. Who's that? Sun god, green face, every statue in Egypt. So who the heck is returning, and why are they called the Nine? Okay, this is large, intelligent plasma being. And how did they get large? And how did they get intelligent? And how did they get to be the life designers? We just happen to have a few slides, if we have time. John Dee's mirror, full sequence, 188. Okay, now see, we need to get clever here. So I go to share screen, and I'm going to go to this website. It's goldenmean.info/whale dreamers. Whale dreamers. And I want to show you the physics of the origin of the nine. Okay, so here is 9 plasma bodies make up the whale dream. What is it about the 9 electric domains which self-organize? Now, we were there our partner, Steve Tribeck, who just communicated with me right now, actually. Steve Tribeck was the Aboriginal coordinator when John Lennon funded the film Whale Dreamers. And this is a tribe that knows that their purpose for being is to be able to coherent lucid dream with the whales. And if they can call the whales, for example, there's photographs, they're out there doing dental work on the whale. The whale call, I got a toothache, comes into shore. The whole tribe goes in and does the dental work. And, there's pictures. This is a cool story. And Kim Kindersley, we worked with him for years in Australia. And the story is that Julian Lennon got convinced to fund this film because Jason Lean went to him with John Lennon's after-death music. It's a real story, and proved that John Lennon was composing music after death because the rose symbolism convinced Julian Lennon that it was indeed his father, John Lennon, back from the dead. And that's how the film Whale Dreamers got, it's a very romantic story. Anyway, this is our friend Buna, and it's true, we've known him for many, many years, from the Mirning whale dreaming Aboriginal tribe from Nullarbor in South Australia. This is south of Adelaide. It's called The Bite because the whale took a bite out, and that's where the whale dreams. And there's a bite right there. That's Buna. And this is his family story. He was called the Whales with music, with kids. So, and this is his grandmother and shaman teacher and mentor. I don't know if you can feel the presence of that ancestor memory there. And this is their tribal outfit, these whale dreamers, and the whale fins that they wore when they were doing the whale dreaming. And so this was a tribe whose destiny was communicating with the whales. That was their life purpose. And these are some of the explorers. And the diamond shape of the tail of the whale. Yeah, and here's the same diamond shape on the tail, on the mouth of the whale here, and on the shaman's paint. And that, by the way, that the Aboriginal there would walk 1,000 miles to get the right iron paint to paint, because the iron in that paint was psychoactive. And so the paint has a very powerful psychoactive function. I can't explain all these pictures. So ancient rituals of songs at sea, and this is, there he is calling the whales. There he is calling the whales. And this is a beautiful, beautiful story. So now we get to the science part of the story. Let's see if I can do this right. So this is a picture from the real plasma physics of living body waveforms and the history of the nine. This is called Stars to Earth Bridge. This later becomes the movie Last Mimsy, the 9 tetra, which makes Sri Yantra. So first, in Los Alamos, they determined that the only way plasma donut domains would self-organize into a quote-unquote negentropic or quote-unquote living body is 9 toroidal donut domains, one above the other. Then the implosion goes to completion and they self-organize and it becomes stable as a waveform. This is called the 9. Now, later, John McGovern here, who first interpreted all of the cave paintings in Australia, then believed he could interpret all the cave paintings based on plasma physics, plasma toroids. That's why there were Hebrew alphabet letters in the Australian caves. So this was the physics of the 9, and this is a long story. Here, it's about when intelligent plasma, when millions of children sang the same song, it was measured 11 different times, a dramatic change in the solar flares. And so there's a lot here, but in the article that's relevant to this conversation is here, why there are 9 levels in Dante's Inferno and 9 levels in the Pagoda, and why the Anunnaki and the Greeks and the Egyptians, they all had the 9. And the intelligence of that, okay, I'm gonna, close that window, stop the share. The intelligence of that is that the symmetry operations which enable plasma to communicate, which later becomes the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet. And that's where we want to go here. Remember that you've seen many of the pictures that the Hebrew alphabet is formed by the approach vectors of plasma toroid domains indexed to the symmetry of the tetracube. And so if you take this spiral on this torus and index the tetracubic shadows of that spiral, you get Hebrew and Sanskrit. Well, the superset of that is Ophanim-Enochian angel alphabets, and that's how the movie Stargate was made. And how you make stargates, you implode plasma and you get the hypersonic component, which is the superluminal longitudinal component, which is the physics of stargates. And so that all becomes from this learning of the symmetry of ancient sacred alphabets, which John Dee was studying. Now, the slides about that is full sequence 188 to 202. I want to show you what John Dee was doing that later was called Bucky bow ties from James Egan, that John Dee was studying scintillation of light as a mechanism of communication with angels. And it involved something called the pinhole camera pinhole camera, which later was a study in perspective, which is later a study in phase conjugate mirrors. So he was getting very close to the physics of not just ancestor phone calls and angel memories. And I must credit Jim Egan for that story. So now this is the last, let's see if I'm ambitious enough to put this together. So I need the last images of this talk. It's full sequence keynote slide number 188 to 202. Keynote full sequence. Let's see if I can do this now. Slide 188. That's longitudinal complex. 188. So are you seeing Hebrew and Sanskrit here? Do I have the right slide up? I hope. Okay.
Yes, we see it.
Oh, good, good. Okay, so I'm going to finish here in a minute, and then we'll go to questions. But you see the point here. So these are some examples of the English Arabic script letters. There's H, and there's W, and there's R. And the component of that Hebrew letter, Sheen, the way they index the tetracubic tilt of the Hebrew letters was the tagin or crownlet. That told you where you are in the tetracube by indexing the axis of the tetracube. Whereas when you take the same letter shape and that becomes Sanskrit here, all you do is you use a vertical and horizontal bar to indicate your relative perspective angle with respect to the tetracube. Point being that it's tetracubic symmetry of plasma domains, which is creating this ancient sacred alphabets. So here, this is from Jim Egan, who I think just did wonderful work. You can see this film of that documentary Jim made with us about John Dee's work on the phase conjugate mirror. Well, the prelude to a phase conjugate mirror, which was called the point of fusion collapse in the shadow box mirror. So at the point where vision goes through a pinhole, it turns inside out on the other side, and you have a point of perfect collapse or fusion point or phase conjugation. And that fusion point does more than invert the symbol at the fusion point, the pinhole of perfect conjugate implosion. You get the sorting where you prehend, which is to say you create a coherent coupling point with normally invisible longitudinal interferometry. So that at that coupling point there, you can touch ancestor memory, angel phone calls, longitudinal ray science. The cool stuff. Now, what Jim Egan called this study was how four Bucky bow ties make a vector equilibrium, which is phase conjugating opposing pine cones kissing noses. And this is the study that John Dee was actively doing when he realized that even a point of simulating light became a communication device for certain ancestral and angelic phone calls. It's literally, you see these pine cones kissing noses here. It's where these vectors converge. It's where the mind of God blows donuts in a tilt angle array called the decadelta, the Hebrew alphabet. Yod He Vav He, the permutations of the names of God, so to speak, are actually the donut array of this nesting only index angle set, which allows donuts to implode, hence communicate. This is more about how Sanskrit works, applicatives, but we don't have time for that now. But this is the array of the Ophanim Enochian angel alphabet, which later became the tablet of Nalvaj. And if you read down this tablet, I don't know if we have it here, actually read the name Michael, Gabriel, Ophaniel, and the names of angels are actually the sequence of symmetry operations to enable hypercubic plasma implosion. Angel names are simply the symmetry operations by which angels make bodies, as it were, which is this whole story of 7 spins, 5 spins, turning inside out. This was the hypercube story. And then this becomes what a Stargate is, because it's how you implode the vectors. And this actually then became the Greek alphabet. And I think we have the Cherokee here. Oh yeah, here's Zadkiel, Zaphiel, Kunael, Raphael, Hanael, Mikael, Gabriel. This is the tablet of Nalvaj. The names of angels are names of symmetry operations. And this is the roots of Cherokee, who called the Ophanim Enochian the Adawi, and I want to thank Dahani Wahoo for helping me when I did the lecture for the Sacred Cherokee. And this then became the tablet of Hermes, the emerald tablet. And look, here you have the swastika in the emerald tablets is, again, these vector approach vectors. And finally, this is the specific letters, Ophanim Enochian, in the movie Stargate, this implosive vector array, which enabled this communication device. And here's the 7 spins, 5 spins, which was later called the sigil of truth in the Ophanim Enochian. And there's more in this on the emerald tablets of Thoth. And this story goes on, but that's what we had for this evening and a little taste. So stopping the screen share, I see it's 7:17, so maybe a few minutes for questions. But is there a summary here? The summary is, if we understand how a plasma vortex gains implosive inertia, we do understand how consciousness grows. Consciousness is the size of that field. And ascension is the process by which the number of superposed harmonics, which is the number of superposed axis of charge spin symmetry, called the next dimension. And that does increase density at those nodes. So it is the next density, but it's a very specific and measurable physics, happens in the braiding and DNA, for example. So that was my little story tonight. If you want the braiding DNA animations, goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto is all that stories and graphics, and that's sort of another lecture. But I think we had a little fun. And
well, that
yes.
was a lot of fun. Lots of fun. All right. I see that we do have some questions for you, Dan.
Good.
All right. We have one here. Can you please explain? This is from Chanty. Can you please explain what astrohygiene means? I must have missed that part.
It's a beautiful and appropriate question. Astral hygiene is generally the practices necessary to keep your plasma body coherent as you propagate, whether it's lucid dream, astral travel, remote view, or after death. Astral hygiene refers to what it takes to keep your plasma body intact and not broken up or even parasited. And astral hygiene begins with understanding what are holes in the aura. Remember, you had that talk with your teenager about not using recreational drugs, and you said, don't take my word for it. Here, measure the holes in your aura. And the recreational drugs cause holes in the aura because the implosion that holds your aura together becomes asymmetric when the implosive force is externally induced. You have to make the implosion yourself for the symmetry in your aura to not have holes. Remember, you go into any bar and every drunk there has got astral parasites. Why? Their aura is holy. Why? I mean, holy. And why? Because the alcohol reduces oxygen content in the brain, the implosion is asymmetric, you get holes in the aura, and you attract astral parasites. That's an introduction to the very, very big subject of astral hygiene. But I think Elena Danaan does a service when she teaches some of that as well. That it's very fine to do these connections and intuitions, but channeling, for example, requires astral hygiene, which is basically powerful intent to discriminate. And it's a big subject, but that's an intro.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that adds a lot to what I was talking about, because that is very important. And I never really thought about protecting ourselves here in order to be protected out there. That makes sense.
So that's why you want your allies, your shamanic allies and your ancestors with you.
Yeah. Yeah, very good to have. And here's another question from Shauna Marie. To your knowledge, has anyone ever been able to use alchemy to create silver, gold, and other metals?
Well, we know many stories and many documented historical reports of creating gold, and some of our friends talk about silver as well. Actually, I believe it was Joseph Champion had a table of isotope transition critical temperatures, which if you get a critical temperature within a tenth of a degree, you're a long way toward the initiation of alchemy. And that can be done for almost every valuable metal in the atomic table, not just gold and silver. Those isotope transitions now, we have not just a temperature, we have the frequency for it. So that's advanced physics here, but we have a fusion physics group that's deep in that. But a short summary is critical temperature, critical frequency of isotope transition, and critical phase conjugate dielectric, something like philosopher's stone, which catalyzes by charge collapse the high permissive dielectric. So that's a big question, but the short answer is there's all kinds of stuff you can do. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know it can be done. In fact, I know how to do it. And for those that wonder if it can be done, there is a plate about a foot across that is sitting in a glass case at the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul, Turkey. The top half of it is gold, the bottom half of it is silver. And the story is that it was dipped in something to change the molecular structure to make it, actually it was the other way around. It was silver and then they dipped it in something, it became gold at the bottom half. It's right there in the museum. And on the other hand too, if there is a way that you can put mercury and boil it, run electricity through it, and you get a sheet, there's a specific voltage on that electricity, but you get a sheet of gold that will precipitate on top of the mercury over a period of time, short period of time. So
and the thickness of that sheet would probably be related to critical temperature and frequency signature environment as well. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, it can be done. So, hey, go for it, Sean. You're going to like that.
And the symbolism, it's important to remember, they always say it's about a heart of gold, and the relationship of pure intention to success is more than metaphoric here.
Yeah. And Jim is asking you, is the spinning tornado going through the pineal gland?
Well, if you ever had Kundalini, you'd know the answer to that one. It burns like hell, I'll tell you. And that fire is, my Kundalini, my pineal has been burnt hundreds of times over the last 30 years of Kundalini. And so my crown chakra is way too open, which means I can see light through the top of my head, powerful. On the other hand, there are astral hygiene issues as well. Like if you're in a store with a mercury vapor light over your head, you do not want your crown chakra to be open. Astral hygiene 101.
Yeah. And here is another question from Zara. Dan, could you articulate how we can heal the holes in our aura? Also, what does it mean for us to be part of Draco if this is the parasite energy?
Well, my partner Gumati, who taught meditation for the Ashayas for many years, she said a lot of their members came from people who had drug abuse and needed to heal holes in their aura. And, there was no real shortcut. It took years of work, meditation, good diet, and eventually you regather the threads of those tornadoes in your own hand. That is, say, you re-implode yourself, you reinvent yourself, you discover your soul purpose, and you begin to regather those threads into one implosive coherence. A symptom of success would be longer and longer attention span and able to focus on larger and larger objectives. That tells you when the holes are healing. By the way, again, not subjective. Use GDV, you can see the holes in the work. And that is the work.
Yeah. And to increase our attention span there, it's very important to be in sunlight that you talked about.
It's a wonderful, and to be where magnetic lines cross, and not to be in poisonous buildings and electrosmog with bad air.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the second part of that question was, what does it mean that we're part of the Draco? Well, just because Grandpa and Grandma had a good side and a bad side of the family, sometimes having a good side and bad side of the family is how you got to be interesting. So the Draco, you see, although how they got in our galactic sector is a matter of great historical investigation. Ask Johann Fritz, colorful. Point being, they were the survivalists. They were strong. They were powerful. Now they screwed up when they began replicating stopped replicating androgynously, and that was the beginning of the war of sexes in the Draco, and they lost long-term memory. So their problem of loss of ensoulment, we are literally the potential vaccine for. It's a beautiful thing. So that the fact that we have a fragment of the Draco blood definitely could be useful. And yes, it was dangerous. And I'm sure the life designers, took some risks here. But the potential of creating an explosive new branch of DNA, the level at which we could become psychokinetic, have you steered a star lately? It's fun.
Hey, Zara, I have another question for you. Probably one of the most important questions that we have heard today, and that is, what should we focus on day to day to help in our ascension?
Yeah. Thank you for asking the right question, obviously. And, we have a book on the hygiene instructions. It's called The Implosion and Secret Science of Ecstasy and Immortality at goldenmean.info/conscious kids on the hygiene, and it's free, the PDF. And basically, the yoga, the diet, the ability to think every thought based on pure principle. In other words, at the moment of death, only thoughts that serve everyone can go through that implosion. If you practice thinking pure principle every moment, you will attract more and more charge. So in effect, the only reason we die is because we tried to store too many unshareable thoughts. As soon as you begin thinking only shareable thoughts, then you implode all the time, and you don't need to die, because dying was only invented to teach us not to die. So there's the diet, there's the hygiene, there's the yoga, there's the discipline of thinking, and let's talk about the kinesthetic, which is a part of the yoga, which is the trajectory of movement, which will attract charge, the quality of grace. So if you know how to do a spiral, even with your finger, in such a geometry, that if you change speed and direction correctly, at the end, you feel a tingle at your fingertips. So that's an example of imploding capacitance, literally the quality of being able to attract grace. And if your intent is service everywhere you go, you will always attract that charge.
And also tell the listeners about where can they get a hold of you? Where can they read your material? What is your favorite place to make contact with people, and books and so on?
Well, the main website is fractalfield.com. Plasmatech is Theraphi, THERAPHI.net. And our YouTube channel, almost 2 million views now, youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field, and Facebook, Facebook.com/Dan Winter.